The New York Giants open mandatory mini camp on Tuesday. They'll have practices open to the media on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I will be there to give you guys in person reports both here on YouTube and on bigblueview.com. So hopefully you guys will check those out. And here to help me break down what we might expect during the mandatory mini camp, what we've already learned throughout voluntary OTAs, is good friend Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and of Giants Country on Sports Illustrated. Patty, how you doing? Are you ready for this couple of day interruption to our summer fun?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the last week of spring football for us, then we get a 6-week break, and then it's training camp, and then it's all the way through. So, yeah, might as well.
So let me start with this. We've had we've gone through the voluntary portion of the off season already. Um, Media's only had access to 3 practices. I think you and I have each probably been to 2 of those. Um, by and large, we know what most of the major questions are about the Giants entering 2024. What in your mind, if anything, has been answered already in your mind during the voluntary portion of the off season?
I would say probably quarterback. I mean, they supposedly tried to trade up to get Drake May. That did not happen. They did not take another quarterback in the draft. They seem insistent on running it back with Daniel Jones, believing that, okay, we couldn't get a quarterback, so we pivoted. We took a wide receiver in Malik Neighbors to beef up that offense. So they're going to run it back with what they've got with Daniel Jones, the starter. Once he is healthy, Drew Lock will be the backup, and then it's just a matter: is it going to be DeVito or is it going to be Nathan Rourke at spot number 3? And the other thing that I think has been answered is whether Malik Neighbors is for real. Now, this is kind of interesting because I think back to last year, to last summer, and how we were all oohing and eyeing over Jalen Hyatt, how he was getting open and how he was, just making plays. And we've kind of seen some of that from Malik Neighbors. But the difference being Malik Neighbors, there's just something about him that just makes you think what you're seeing is not because he's necessarily going up against competition that can't bump him or get physical with him, that what you're seeing now is what you're going to see in a game. So I think he's answering some questions about whether or not he's really for real.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. Patty, let me ask you something about Daniel Jones. We had access to Jones after one of the OTAs. We've seen the way that he's moved around on the field, the way that he's thrown the ball. Is there a little something, a little attitude to Daniel Jones this spring that maybe you're not used to seeing? I mean, I think to me there has been, and I'm curious if I'm the only one, if I'm just kind of imagining it or wishing it was there.
No, you're not imagining things. You're not crazy yet, so we're not going to send you to the loony bin just yet.
Oh, good. I got a couple of weeks before that happens.
No, I mean, with Daniel Jones, he's definitely walking around these days with a chip on his shoulder. Look, he might sit there and say that he doesn't pay attention to what the fans say or what the media says, but unless the guy is living in a bubble, that's going to come out. I mean, he's going to catch wind of it. You just can't help it. You try not to let it bother you. You try to stay focused on what it is you have to do. But you're absolutely right because, look, if you're Jones and you caught wind that, hey, they tried to trade up to get Drake May, that means they're not really married to me. That would kind of tick me off if I were in his shoes. And I would probably, be walking around with an attitude and a chip on my shoulder if I were him.
I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on QB3, but you mentioned it, so I'm going to toss it out there. I was standing on the sideline watching practice the other day, and we were talking about Nathan Rourke. And I know that people are there's a big segment of Giants fans that are still stuck in DeVito mania, still in love with Tommy DeVito, still think Tommy DeVito should be competing to be QB1. But I'm watching Nathan Rourke throw the ball, and I'm wondering if Rourke has an opportunity to take a job away from Tommy DeVito this summer. Um, I'm just curious if you think there might be an actual competition for the third roster spot at quarterback.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, DeVito, for as good as he was last year, had a lot still to work on. And I think he would be the first person to admit that. He held on to the ball at times way too long, missed some open receivers, but, he was a rookie. And quite honestly, if you remember, he really wasn't supposed to play last year. He just had to because of the circumstances. So they got him as ready as could be given the circumstances and the timing. But I think if they had all had their druthers, he probably would have sat the entire year, developed, and then maybe stepped in and competed, maybe even for quarterback two this year, with Drew Lock. Now, that being said, I think, we have to see what happens with Daniel Jones. Is he going to get any 11 on 11 in this mini camp, which I don't think he will. So I think it's going to be the Drew Lock show. He's going to run the bulk of the reps. And then I think you'll see DeVito and Nathan Rourke split, the other half of the reps. Now, here's the other thing to remember. Typically, the Giants have kept two quarterbacks on their roster, the 53-man roster. Given the situation with Jones, they might have to keep three this year. So, it's possible they keep three and put the other guy who loses out on the practice squad. It's all going to depend on obviously how Daniel Jones comes through the summer, but don't, rule that out as a possibility.
Absolutely. Patty, Brian Dable says every year that this time of the year, the OTAs, the voluntary part, the rookie mini camp, even the mandatory mini camp, he says it's all a teaching camp. It's a learning camp. He always says nobody's going to win a job, nobody's going to lose a job, at this time of the year. But with that background, we talked about the one thing that you think that you've learned already in the voluntary part. What's the biggest question that you have that you hope to get some clarity on over the next couple of days, at least as far as what it'll look like heading into training camp?
Offensive line. I think you got to go with offensive line. Look, Dable did say that jobs are not won or lost. However, if you are not practicing for whatever the reason, because you're not working at it, or maybe you're still rehabbing from an injury, and the guy in front of you is performing, you can lose ground on the depth chart. Even though the coach will say there's no depth chart right now, I think they call it a rep chart. So you can ultimately fade if you're not giving everything you bring to the table. So, I would want to see, for example, what's going on with Evan Neal. Evan Neal, the first two practices we attended, the first two OTAs, he worked in those. I mean, he didn't do everything, but he was on the field. He stretched with his teammates, did individuals. This last one, I don't believe he did anything, which, raises the antenna. Did he have a setback? Is he not working to earn those reps? What exactly is going on there? So I'm curious to see, is he going to get reps in this, in this mini camp? I was talking to somebody about it and they said, oh, maybe it was just load management. I'm like, no, I don't think it's load management because they're not in pads. All right. They're not working every single day. They have, every other day off, and Dable has kind of adjusted how, the intensity, if you will. Like, for example, this last one that they had on Friday, they only did 11 on 11. So I'm curious to see what's up with that. I think, Evan Neal, we can all agree, they need him to play up to his draft pedigree. And if they don't, how long of a leash is he going to have? And how soon do they maybe plug Jermaine Illuminor in that spot if that doesn't work out?
Patty, let's talk about that just a little bit. I've been saying again and again that, because people keep questioning, well, why isn't John Runyon on the left side? Because Runyon said he would prefer the left side. At least that's what he said initially. And, now Runyon has said, He's been on the right side for 2 years. He feels at home on the right side. I tried to get Brian Daboll to give some clarity as to why they aligned that way, and he said he the one thing he did say was he likes Runyon, the most experienced guard that they have, in between the two young players, in between John Michael Schmitz and Evan Neal. But to me, it's much ado about nothing, really. Are what? Do you have any thoughts on how the Giants are aligning this group at this point?
I mean, there could be something to the fact of having Runyon next to Schmitz, who, was entering his second season, and Neal, who has struggled. But it could also be that, they know that they can plug Aluminor in at right tackle if they need to, and they also know that Runyon can step in and play guard, in a snap if need be. So why, why not cross train and give them opportunities on the other side? If they have to shake up that offensive line because maybe Evan Neal isn't ready or he's struggling again, they will have options to do so. So I think it's much ado about nothing. And quite frankly, I don't see anything wrong with cross training. I mean, you would think that, even if you're a signed veteran and you have guaranteed money, you'd want to cross train because the more you can do, the more you can help your team. So, that's how I see it. I don't I think it's much ado about nothing. And I think the coaches are probably figuring, look, if we've got to jumble this unit up again for training camp because of whatever, we can do so at the drop of the hat because we've cross trained.
Josh Azudu, for example, has played 4 positions so far this spring. He's played everywhere but center, and I have no problem with that. If he's going to be a backup, if he's going to be a guy that you might need all across the offensive line, then I think that giving him opportunities across the offensive line at this time of year is a good thing. The one thing that I would hope, and I know you and I both talked about and wrote about this a year ago, I would like to see them settle what their offensive line is going to be before the end of the preseason. Because last year at the end of the preseason, we still didn't know what that offensive line was going to look like. They still didn't settle it until right before week 1. And I thought that was a mistake. So hopefully they settle by at least early in training camp as to what their 5's going to be.
Yeah, I thought that was just coaching malpractice. I got to be honest with you. I'm sitting there and I'm saying, look, an offensive line, your starting 5 need to gel. You need to get them on the field, and I'm not saying you have to do it, midway through camp or whatever, but you've got to give them enough time to gel and build up that continuity. And a lot of them, when I asked about it last year, they kind of downplayed it. They're like, well, we're in meetings all day, and we work on communication. And I'm like, yeah, working on communication in the classroom is one thing. Doing it on the field when you've got a 300-pound defender in front of you, quite another, because you don't have as much time to sit there and say, okay, what do you think? What do you think that protection should be? So yeah, and we did ask Carmen Priscillo about it when he spoke to the media a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Look, right now I'm not worried about it, but I might get worried if we're a week out of the season and we still don't have an answer. Then I might get a little concerned." But yeah, they've got to make that decision. I mean, there's how many more times can you play around with different combinations? And if you're doing that, that means you don't really have the confidence in what you got to say, okay, these are my best 5 and I'm rolling with them.
Absolutely. Patty, the one thing that we have seen different this year through the OTAs is that we've seen the Giants do 11 on 11 every day. I don't think we saw 11 on 11 last year until training camp, until after the whole ramp up period of training camp. And I had this, when you look back on it, I wonder sometimes if the Giants and if Brian Daboll and the sports science guys, I wonder if they were so concerned about the idea of getting guys to the starting line healthy that they didn't get them to the starting line ready to compete. And I just wonder, what your take is on the fact that we've seen 11 on 11 all spring.
First off, I think it's good. I mean, even though you're not in pads and there's no contact, you should get some periods in there where, you've got a guy lined up across from you. Um, you know, that being said, I mean, Dable was asked about that, and I think he said, well, we didn't have numbers last year at defensive line. I think if I remember correctly, there might have been one practice that I remember we went to where they legitimately didn't have um, enough defensive linemen. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I kind of remember that being the case. Um, I can't speak to the other practices, the ones that we weren't allowed in there, but I would like to think that if you have guys coming in, even if they're not your starters, at least put them in there because, if they've got to play, don't you want to find out if they can at least do their assignments? Even if they're not, legitimate first stringers, at least see what you got with them, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. I never understood that. So I do think there might be some, validity to the fact that Dable was more concerned with keeping people healthy because we saw that carry over during the summer. Remember, he didn't play the starters. He only played them for like what, one period, one series or something like that. And
Mhm.
we kept saying, "What are you doing, man? You've got new pieces. Why aren't you playing them?" They come out against the Cowboys. They have half of a good series, and then poof, everything goes up in smoke. So, you know, I'm glad to see that Dable is being a little smarter with that because look, injuries are going to happen. You can't avoid them. The only way you avoid them is if you put these guys in bubble wrap or you hold them off the field. And the drawback is you're not going to have them ready.
Yeah, I agree, and I wonder, if that had something to do with the way that the Giants started a season ago. Patty, I think we would be remiss if we didn't spend a little bit of time talking about the retirement of tight end Darren Waller, something that we've anticipated for months now, came to fruition over the weekend. Sunday night, he put out a video, officially announcing his retirement. Um, Initially, just your thoughts on Waller's retirement. Does it affect the Giants' performance on offense? Just your and maybe some thoughts on Waller the person.
Yeah, first off, I wish Waller all the best. I mean, it's pretty clear from that video that he was struggling with his mental health and trying to, find a happy medium for himself. Mental health is a topic that I think a lot of people are either reluctant to talk about or just want to sweep under the rug, but it's a very real issue for a lot of people. And, the fact that Darren Waller is, think about it, he's leaving millions on the table to pursue something that, he has more of a passion for that makes him happy. And at the end of the day, while Giant fans might say, "Oh, it sucks that he's walking away." At the end of the day, he's got to do what's best for him. So, to that I wish him all the best. Now, as far as the effect on the team, um, the whole reason why the Giants, I think, acquired Waller in the first place is because I think they were looking to give opposing defensive coordinators another thing to plan against. All right. Last year they had Saquon Barkley, who, as we know, defensive coordinators planned against specifically to take him out of the game. And, until they really got, Waller, it was like, okay, who's their other guy or other guys that, if this guy gets taken out of the game by the game plan, who can step up? So that was the intention, one of the intentions with Waller. And of course, it didn't work out for, various reasons. So now the Giants are at a situation where, all right, no Saquon, Waller is retired. They have Malik Neighbors. Who's going to be the guy who, once defensive coordinators figure out how to take Malik Neighbors out of the game or minimize his impact, who's going to be the guy that says, okay, you might have taken him out of the game. Now try and take me out of the game.
Yeah, interesting. But I do think the Giants did, while they didn't bring in a tight end who's got that resume of Waller and is proven to be that dynamic, they did spend the off season I think, preparing for a Waller retirement, by restocking the position. So I do think, they're not looking at it and going, "Oh my God, who's going to play tight end for us now?"
Yeah, I mean, they kinda knew. I mean, it was pointing in this direction basically, from the first moment the news broke that he was contemplating it. What do they say? If you start thinking about it, chances are you've already got one foot out the door. And, at the time, we obviously didn't know the extent of what Waller was dealing with. And, I tip my hat to him because it took a lot of guts to get out there and put that video out there and admit that, look, I wasn't right. A lot of people won't do that. A lot of people will just smile and go about their daily lives, and they're being eaten up inside. So I credit Waller for doing that. And again, I wish him well. But the Giants, I think, kind of knew what was happening, and you know, they gave him his space. And I tell people all the time, they're like, "Well, why didn't they force him to make a decision sooner?" Because they didn't need the money. Now they've got the money coming. That will carry them into the summer. It should carry them into part of a good chunk of the regular season. And, who knows? Maybe if they even want to, they can go and they can do at least one contract extension. I don't think they have any blockbusters that they have to do, because they took care of Dexter and they took care of Andrew Thomas last year. So if they wanted to, for example, I don't know, extend Drew Lock, if they figure out, if they say, oh, Daniel Jones isn't the answer, but we want Drew Lock another year, maybe that's an extension. I mean, there's options now for the Giants now that, Waller has made the decision and that extra, 12 million or whatever it is coming back on the cap.
Patty, we'll talk about that money in a minute, but I want to ask you something. Ever since it became clear that Waller was going to retire, I mean, even going in, last week, I was getting questions um, you know, ab- about all that money, and as I said, we'll talk about the money in a minute. But once Waller did retire, I'm getting a lot of comments in my timeline and at Big Blue View, and I'm guessing that you're getting a lot of the same stuff. Oh, bad deal by Joe Shane. Another mistake. Oh, this shows why Joe Shane's not up to the task of being an NFL GM. He got fleeced, and he could have gotten a better player if he'd have just kept that third round pick, which I think was 100th overall. And just a whole lot of ripping Joe Shane for making this move. And and I have been pushing back against that because sometimes you make the right move and it just doesn't work. Or sometimes you take a risk because you don't have something. Maybe if it works out as it looked like it might last summer when Waller was dominating everybody, sometimes you take a risk. And for me, the acquisition of Waller for a third round pick that wasn't the Giants initially. It was Kansas City's that they got. The Giants got that for Kadarius Toney. There was a time when Shane was being praised for turning Kadarius Toney into Darren Waller. To me, it just didn't work. It was a risk. It was an opportunity. It was a chance that they took to make the football team better, to give Daniel Jones something he didn't have, going into last year, which was a primary target, and it just didn't work. I can't kill Joe Shane at all for making, for the fact that Darren Waller's now retired. I don't know how you feel about all the criticism of Shane for making the move.
I almost wish I had saved some of the responses when the news came out because, as I recall, a lot of people were happy with that move. A lot.
Hmm.
A lot of people were celebrating that move. And now, I don't know if those same people that were celebrating are the ones, trashing Joe Shane. But look, I look at it this way. Would you rather have a GM play it passive and sit on his hands? Or would you rather he take a gamble, a low risk gamble? I mean, as you pointed out, Waller was a low risk, high reward gamble. It didn't work out. They gave up a third round pick that, like you said, they might not have had if they hadn't traded Kadarius Toney. Those are
Besides
the
which,
fights.
Patty, when's the last time the Giants got a third round pick? Right? No offense to Cordell Flott, no offense to
Right.
Andrew
Well, I
Phillips,
mean,
but
there's
but
always
but
a
when's
first.
Yeah, when's the last time they got one right? How
Right,
many
there's always a
GMs ago was
first.
that? Yeah,
It's always
there
a
you
first,
go.
but, again, for those that are trashing look, no GM is gonna make the right move 100% of the time, and I know, some people on my time have said, "Well, Joe Shane hasn't done anything right," and I would point to Bobby Okereke, who was a smart move. I think you can make a case that Isaiah Simmons was a smart signing. We'll see if Devin Singletary works out to be as good of a signing as I think he might be. Um, Malik Neighbors, is anybody unhappy with that move right now? But everybody's like, oh, well, he spent, 47 million a year on Daniel Jones and traded for Darren Waller and this, that, and the other thing. You got to take chances. And sometimes they play out and sometimes they don't. That's just how life is.
And sometimes, Patty, the thing that I say is, look, people always complain about play calling. All right. You know what a good play is in football? Good play is one that works.
Yep.
A bad play is one that doesn't work. Doesn't matter how brilliant the play call is. If it doesn't work, it's a bad play call. If it's a stupid play call and it works,
It's a
then
genius.
fantastic. It's a genius play call. And it's the same with being a GM. You have to take a risk. You have to roll the dice when you have an opportunity presented to you that you think pushes your football team forward. You take the chance. And Joe took the chance. Sometimes you make the right decision and it just doesn't work. And that's how I feel about this one. It just didn't work the way that the Giants hoped it would.
Exactly. So you know what? You pick up the pieces and you move on.
All right. Last thing, Patty, we talked about the money with Darren Waller a little bit. I think it was 11.625 million that the Giants are gaining in cap space. Everybody wants to know what the Giants should do with that money. I've been saying don't rush out and spend it. You've got to get through the season. You've got injuries to deal with. You'll have players to sign. It takes 8-10 million sometimes just to get through the regular season. So I'm curious if you think there's a way that the Giants need to spend that money or should spend that money. Is there one thing that you would like to see the Giants go out and do? And what would you do with the money?
I'd go on a vacation and not come back.
There you go.
No, seriously. Actually, I wrote about this today on New York Giants on SI about the money. So, what I think is going to happen, um, the Giants, I think we can agree, have some question marks. Offensive line, cornerback too. Go through training camp and see if those questions don't resolve themselves. If you don't have concrete answers. If you don't, you take some of that money and you reinforce those positions. If they do, then you say, okay, you know what? Now I've got money to spend to churn the bottom of the roster. I got money if I want to extend somebody, which, I don't know that there's anybody that they absolutely positively have to extend. But here's the other thing, and I wrote about this again on New York Giants on SI.com. The dead money hit next year for Waller, I think, is 4.9 million. So you mentioned before that, most teams need between, roughly around 8 million to get through the season. If the Giants can end up saving some of that money at the end of the year, that might offset some of the dead money from next year that they're going to have with the Waller transaction, which is going to be important because if they move on from Daniel Jones, now you're talking a bigger chunk of change. And if you can use some of that money, which obviously you can carry over from year to year, you offset what it costs you to kind of get them off your books. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like if the amount is 4.9 and the Giants have say 4.7, the net is what, 200,000, which I think a lot of people can live with, which I think Joe Shane will take any day of the week.
Absolutely. And it's always a balancing act, Patty. And of course, fans think about today and they think about, we have a couple dollars. Let's go get a cornerback. But it's a balancing act between today, tomorrow, next year, the resources that you're going to need. And you hate to throw away resources that that you're going to need a year from now to, as you said, maybe to pay the cap hit, the dead money for Daniel Jones if you get there. It's a balancing act, and I think you're 100% right. If you have the answers on your roster, and they may and they may not on the defensive line, they may and they may not at cornerback, they may and they may not at running back too. But this is the time of year, training camp, the preseason is the time of year to find out. And there's going to be a lot of veterans that shake loose at the end of August.
Mhm.
So that's the time when you'll have options.
Yeah, exactly. So, play it out, and plus, you don't know. Will you have injuries? Injuries could pop up. Meanwhile, if you go out and you spend that money now, first of all, who's out there, that you can honestly say, "Oh, we got to get this guy." I know there's some defensive backs out there that people have talked about, but see what you've got before you have to spend. I mean, you might
You're
be
gonna
pleasantly surprised.
you're gonna have a lot more options at the end of August than you have now.
Absolutely, and cheaper options probably.
All right, Patty. I'll be looking forward to seeing you for the next couple days out in East Rutherford, and we won't be peeking through the fence, people. We'll have a better view. Yeah, we'll have a view from about 70 yards away with a whole line of 300 and something pound offensive linemen standing in our way, so we can't see a whole lot. But so be
It is what it is, but
it.
I mean, it could be worse, Ed. They could tell you when you show up tomorrow that you have to stand outside the fence.
Probably wouldn't be the first time. anyway, Giants fans, please. I hope you look forward to our continued coverage here on YouTube and to our coverage of mandatory minicamp on Big Blue View and Patty's work on New York Giants on SI and Locked On Giants as well. So thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.